moving on to the wide receiver position, Marvin Harrison landing with the Cardinals. There's 4 A+ grades I gave. I just wanted to highlight him real quick because I think he belongs as a fringe first rounder now in fantasy redrafts, given this beautiful spot. I wrote it up at rotostreetjournal.com. Kyler Murray's top target in 2022, I know you put this note on here, 10 of 15 games, 10+ targets. And to add even more context to that, so Hopkins averaged over 10 targets per game when he was healthy in 2020 and 2022, was the wide receiver 5 and wide receiver 9 in fantasy points per game across those 2 years. He was hurt in 2021. But when also D-Hop was out in 2022, Marquise Brown averaged 10.7 targets per game, wide receiver 5 in volume, and 18.3 fantasy points per game, wide receiver 7 in that sense. And these guys, I don't think can even hold a and I love Hopkins, but at this stage of his career, a fresh young Marvin Harrison, maybe the best wide receiver prospect that's come in the last 5 years, decade, who knows? We know that this guy can do everything at every single layer of the field, and we know that Kyler Murray loves to pepper his number one guys and really has no one else to throw to. So to me, it's, do I take him over Garrett Wilson? Do I take him, it's just a matter of how high do I rank him, but he's certainly right there as a fringe first rounder for me, and definitely by round 2. It's what we kind of expected. It's what happened. I think it's gold. Do you have anything else to add to that? Because it's just such a beautiful spot.
Yeah, I mean, he's just kind of strolling his way into 150 targets or so. Yeah, we've talked about it at length over the course of these drafts. Kyler Murray just feeding targets to whoever that guy has been, either Hollywood or DeAndre. And I fully believe in the talent of Marvin Harrison. I watched him for 3 years at Ohio State pretty closely. I would like to say pretty closely as an Ohio State fan. But, I have no questions in the talent. The draft capital's there. The opportunity will be there. I mean, unless something significant like injury-wise or something like that happens, this is a cakewalk to I think cakewalk to a top 20 receiver season.
Absolutely. And again, this is a redraft focus show. I just want to keep reiterating that. But dynasty-wise, I think really only CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, the only 3 I could comfortably rank ahead of Marvin Harrison. We'll do some more dynasty breakdowns. But in terms of just in 2024 value, I had 3 other guys with A+ landing spots that I think are walking right into amazing situations. That would be Xavier Worthy, Keon Coleman, and McConkey. Now, saw your notes on the show that you might not actually agree with Xavier Worthy as an A+. So maybe we start there, and you can just kind of give me your take on Xavier Worthy, and then I'll rebut why I think it's absolutely a perfect spot for him for sure. But let's hear what you don't love about it for fantasy.
Yeah, so I love, like, we talked about it right before the draft, our pre-draft show. Like, this is like the spot that makes the most sense in terms of the profile for Worthy and a team that understands how to use a player like him. But obviously this is the dream, but I'm just like, first I'm already just like seeing the price in my head. Like, the Chiefs big receiver, the new guy in town. Like, we've been burned year after year since Tyreek Hill by this new flashy guy. So, like, that's always going to be in the back of my head. And it's probably not fair to, like, keep that in the back of my head just because it's a completely different guy and different draft capital. They burned a first-round pick on him. They're going to want to get him involved. I mean, but we've seen Sky Moore. They used a second-round pick on him. We've seen Kadarius Toney, another first-round pick, who obviously wasn't drafted by the Chiefs but was brought in later on. They've been wasted away. And I don't know, you can put it on the player themselves, but so that's just like one concern that I keep in the back of my head for that. But the target competition is just going to be really brutal. It's the only way I see Xavier Worthy getting there is just on the back of insane efficiency. And I know he can do it, but some of those like targets that we're going to be seeing from Worthy, like those screen targets, like how is Rashee Rice going to play a role in that? And you put a little bit of a note in here. You said, I believe it's 50% of his catches came on screens. Like that was Rashee Rice's bread and butter last year. And it's going to come down to a lot of it is going to come down to the suspension. So there's a lot of variables that play here. And I'm having a hard time just really getting there for Worthy. Like you've got Travis Kelce, who was just brought in on another 2-year extension. He's going to be eating up targets. You've got Hollywood Brown, who I don't love And I think Xavier Worthy will be a bigger asset to this offense than Hollywood Brown. I don't love him either. And then you got Rashee Rice, who's going to be a significant target earner too. I mean, like I talked about his role in the screen game, but I think they expand his route tree and get him involved throughout the offensive scheme. So the target competition is just going to be really tough. He's going to have to do it on very few touches. It's going to require insane efficiency. And unless he's like converting on a lot of these deep balls, I just don't really see him getting there.
I think I agree with a lot of your points, but I also think he's going to end up converting on a lot of the deep balls, and especially the screen game. As you mentioned, nobody has a better wide receiver screen game than Andy Reid. We've seen it time and time again when Tyreek Hill was here, where they just designed it so that Tyreek Hill had just a little bit of space and then could just outrun the entire defense. Who's better than that than Xavier Worthy, 4.21 speed? We saw him do it a ton throughout college. Now, deep threat-wise, he actually, as Scott Barrett pointed out, was the worst in this entire class in terms of yards per target on deep passes. 9.2 yards on deep throws per target was the worst of this class. But he also had the worst accuracy on deep passes as well, 33% catchable target rate. That's going to change with Patrick Mahomes. So I think he has untapped deep ceiling that we have not really even fully seen quite yet. And then, as you mentioned, one of my nuggets on there, 46% of his catches coming on screens. That's what his bread and butter has been. And we know Andy Reid is going to use that to absolute perfection. I can just see the vision in my head of all the plays where he's going to just outrun the entire defense on just a quick little screen. And sure, Rashee Rice, he'll get his screens as well. He's very efficient in that game as well, but he does not have that kind of breakaway gear that Xavier Worthy has. So I expect him to actually potentially out-target Rashee Rice, or at least be more efficient on those looks. And who knows, again, how long we'll see a suspension here for Rashee Rice. Either way, I'm all about this. I think the fit is great. I think we have an untapped deep ball ceiling. And I just see Mahomes. We'll talk about veteran risers and losers in another show sometime soon. But this is like the year I see him getting right back to that 5,000-yard, 40 touchdown. He's got all the weapons around him, and I think the pie is just going to be massive, and that Rashee Rice can eat, that Xavier Worthy can eat, and Kelsey can eat as well, and maybe even some Marquise Brown. I still like all these guys, and yeah, maybe it will be tough to really sustain 4 guys, but we've seen it from Mahomes in the past. At least 3 guys being completely fed. I think it can happen here this year. It's just, and the fact that they traded up to 28, the fact the Bills even let him do that is asinine to me. But they clearly wanted this guy to give up some extra capital to the Bills there. I think it's going to be a perfect fit. And as soon as he gets onto that field, it's going to be dynamite. We did speak of the Bills as well, which I consider an A-plus spot for Keon Coleman. Now, regardless of what you think of the player, and I don't know that I love the guy, 4.61 40 does make me nervous, although timed at 22 miles per hour while running his routes at the combine was the fastest time of anybody. So the game speed, the time speed don't seem to match up. I do think he has a little bit more juice than that timed 40 would suggest here. It's more so, though, the opportunity. We talked about this on the pre-draft show, but just to reiterate yet again, 3,353 air yards, the most in the league, 73.3% of their air yard share, the most in the league, 317 targets, including 54.7% target share, both second most in the league, and 86.3% of their wide receiver target share up for grabs there in Buffalo. And you look at what Diggs has done since being there. And again, you can't just be like, Keon Coleman's going to be Diggs. That would be idiotic. I know that's not going to be the case. I know he's not going to be quite the volume hog, but 168 targets, wide receiver 3, 163 targets, wide receiver 7, 152 targets, wide receiver 4, and 161 targets, wide receiver 9. If anybody on this roster is built to inherit a similar role, it is Coleman, who does have that big body build that is great in contested catches, that does do some damage after the catch when he gets it, and is actually commanding targets in his college career. He was just a little bit below Rome Odunze in that tier, but right below them in terms of his ability to earn targets in college. I loved his. I don't know if you watch any of his post-game or post-draft presser, but just seems like a great, hilarious dude. I know that doesn't mean anything for fantasy, but he just seems so fired up to be there, and as he should be when you're only competing with Curtis Samuel, who I do like. He's going to have his own niche role. I'm not discounting him, but I do think that Keon Coleman has all the upside in the world to dominate the looks here. Said he's already envisioning 3 touchdowns in 30 seconds since he looked at the field. And I really could see that. He is really, really good in those contested catches. So I think at minimum, even if he's not seeing a target share like Stephon Diggs, he does have that 8 to 12 touchdown upside with a guy like Josh Allen throwing him the rock. I'm a huge fan of this landing spot. I hope it works out for the guy. Even if I don't love the player, I think it's perfect. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's tough because there's still an ongoing debate. Like, is this guy actually good? Like, people can't seem to agree. But regardless of whether or not you think he is, it's undeniable that this landing spot is great. And I don't need to go on to keep talking about like the vacated volume and opportunity and stuff. But I think the only other point that I really want to make is I think his skill set and profile mesh well with Josh Allen. And we know Josh Allen is this gunslinger type that loves to get the ball downfield. And we saw some of that with Gabe Davis, but they really couldn't find that connection on this past season. And we've got little competition for Keon Coleman to come into that X receiver role. They've only got Curtis Samuel and Khalil Shakir there, neither of which have the athletic profile or the size to be a true X receiver. So he's going to kind of just roll right into that X receiver role, and his big body, physical nature, physical style of play, I think meshes really well with Josh Allen's. Like, I don't want to say he's like unaware of potential mistakes, but he's not adverse to risk. He is more than okay with getting the ball downfield, putting it into some questionable spots, and I think the profile for Keon Coleman will mesh well with how Josh Allen wants to play football. So I'm pretty excited about this landing spot, and just like the lack of competition, it just makes it that much more enjoyable. But another guy that I think is strolling into volume is Ladd McConkey, and I agree. I think this is an A+ landing spot. McConkey is a really versatile guy. We saw him not only play but succeed at both out of the slot and as a wide receiver in his career at Georgia. So I think he's going to be able to get opportunities early in the season just based on his skill, let alone just the lack of competition that we have in LA right now. And I know that there's a lot of questions like, what is this offensive scheme going to look like? Like, how much opportunity will Ladd McConkey actually be provided? But I think he's regarded to be one of the more polished route runners in the draft, just like an all-around NFL ready receiver. Like, obviously he's not like this massive, like physically super, like he's not going to physically dominate a football game, but I think he's got this skill set and the versatility to be involved with the Chargers offense from day one. And I think you'll have those opportunities pretty quickly. And we've seen, and obviously it's a completely different coaching staff, but we've seen players in Los Angeles have success on the back of really high volume. I mean, Keenan Allen, he's not like, obviously he's a physical specimen, but he's not like one of those freak athletes that's changing the game of football because he's of his physical traits. He's just he still is an all-around, just really high quality receiver. And I think Ladd McConkey has a path to be highly involved in this offense just because of his complete skill set. And I think it's going to be coming from day one.
Absolutely. Keenan Allen, as you mentioned, wide receiver 6, wide receiver 12, 12, and 3 with an average of 18 fantasy points per game across his 4 years with Justin Herbert. He was a whopping top 24 receiver 62% of the time, which is insanely consistent for the wide receiver position, averaging 10.3 targets per game and 27% target share. Absolutely. I think they are comparable skill sets here. And Ladd, not just a slot guy, played 69% of his snaps out wide in college, can get it done at every layer on all the types of routes. I could totally see him being that kind of slide in, and not maybe Keenan Allen right away, but I don't know. It'll be too far off. You do rightfully mention the concerns with the scheme. Greg Roman, such a run-heavy offense, has never been higher than 28th in total pass attempts besides one of his 11 years calling plays. That does seem like a concern, and it is, sure. But you look at when he was in San Fran across those 3 years, Michael Crabtree, 127 targets, 85 catches, 1,100 yards, 9 touchdowns. Anquan Bolden at age 33, 129 targets, 85 catches, 1,179 yards, and 7 touchdowns. And then you also got Bolden the next year, 130 targets, 83 catches, 1,100 yards, and 5 touchdowns. All those years were at least a mid-range wide receiver 2, if not better, in those 3 fantasy finishes. So I don't think it's just a complete, it's Roman, no one's going to ever throw it, no one's ever going to catch a ball. No. And this is Justin Herbert at the quarterback. That was with Alex Smith, the ultimate game manager, and then Colin Kaepernick for those tail end years. Now you get an arm like Justin Herbert. It's as if Jim Harbaugh will never adjust to the type of talent he has. There were talks that they were getting lots of calls to move Justin Herbert, and they did not even come close to entertaining them because of how much they love him. So you got to imagine that at minimum, we're going to get a receiver seeing 120 or so targets from one of the best arms in the game. And I am with you that I think Ladd McConkey is that bet. All these guys, Xavier Worthy, Ladd, Keon Coleman, top 40 wide receivers in my rankings here. So fringe wide receiver threes, but I think all three of them have upside to bust into that top 24 wide receivers if things bend right for them in the volume department, and it looks like it might. Now, those were the big ones to highlight between Marv, Xavier, and of course, Keon Coleman and Ladd as A-pluses. There are a handful of other guys I do consider winners here. We don't need to go too deep into all of them. I'd consider it more of like a B to B minus landing spots, but they certainly got bumped up after the draft in my rankings compared to some other receivers we're about to talk about that neutral to losing landing spots. And those receivers, in my opinion, were Rome Wilson, going pick number 84 in round 3 to the Steelers there. Malachi Corley also going in round 3, pick 65, the first or second pick there of round 3 going to the Jets. And then Jalen Polk and Javon Baker. We already illuminated the fact that there's so much opportunity up for grabs here to be Drake May's number 1 guys. So all of those 4 guys to me were considered big winners. You also got to add in the fact that Polk went round 2, pick 37. So some nice draft capital there. And I thought Baker, one of the steals of the draft in round 4 at pick 110. So those were guys I also considered winners. I have a few takes on all of them, but I'd love to hear if you agree with these, if there's any that you have questions on, or anybody you think I'm forgetting as a potential winner here.
I'm Malachi Corley doesn't really move the needle for me. Maybe I will hear your spiel on Corley after this, but I think Roman Wilson is a notable winner. I mean, we've talked about guys strolling into opportunity in these offenses, but you want to talk about strolling an opportunity? Roman Wilson is going to walk into this slot role for Pittsburgh. Do you know who led Pittsburgh in slot routes last year?
Was it not Gianta?
No, it was Allen Robinson ran the most slot routes, like significantly by a significant margin, ran the most slot routes for Pittsburgh last year. So if that tells you what kind of I don't know what else is going to tell you what kind of availability there is in terms of the slot role in Pittsburgh. And I mean, just like some external thing just about like Wilson as a prospect. I mean, this is just like the type of guy that Mike Tomlin's going to love, just like certified winner, great guy out of Michigan. And he's kind of like the antithesis of Deontay Johnson in terms of doing all of the other things. Like there's videos of him just mauling dudes into the ground, blocking for Blake Corum over the years at Michigan. So this is a guy that I can see getting on the field really quickly for a Mike Tomlin offense. And the role is just, it's right there for him. It's on a pedestal. I mean, beating out, is Allen Robinson even on the Steelers roster anymore?
Probably not. If he is, I don't think he'll sniff the field.
I mean, like, I know Calvin Austin is still on the roster, and he ran it wasn't a ton, but it wasn't nothing. But I mean, if all he has to beat out is Calvin Austin, and then like obviously like Freiermuth is going to get some run out of the slot, but there's nobody. And just as a player, I think the coaching staff's going to love him, and just the lack of competition. Yeah, this is a significant winner for me.
I absolutely agree, and I point to Mike Tomlin's words himself, who is usually pretty reserved in his praise for rookies especially. He comes out and says he's a good player, he's competitive, and this in particular I thought was of note. He creates separation at break points. He's battle-tested on the interior portions of the field. I mean, you think about Deontay Johnson for years, but then also even before that, Antonio Brown. Those are the type of receivers that have absolutely dominated workloads and been used to perfection in this Mike Tomlin offense for sure. Those guys that can really dominate, separate quickly, and work that, again, the battle-tested interior portion of the field. Nothing screams more like a Mike Tomlin guy, in addition to what you mentioned in terms of, he also highlighted that you can't say enough about the winning component in terms of how it shapes his relationships with the game and what they're willing to do, their mettle, and he checks a lot of those boxes. So he couldn't have – I've never seen Mike Tomlin honestly be this effusive in his praise for a rookie. He is in love with Roman Wilson. I agree to the fullest. This is in terms of player skill set, in terms of player mentality, the exact guy that he's going to want to go and win with. I'm a huge fan. I know you questioned the Malachi Corley judgment here, and really it's just, to me, Aaron Rodgers coming back. I'm trying to project a potential like Randall Cobb style role back in the day where moved into the backfield, moved into the slot, lots of those designed yak opportunities. And maybe that's not what happens here, but they already talked about how, like, I think the quote was he'd run over his own grandmother to get into the end zone was what the head coach there, Robert Salah, said about Malachi Corley, how much they love the dog nature of him and how they're going to use him, especially in those goal line packages there. A lot of Randall Cobb, who had multiple 12 to 15 touchdown seasons with Aaron Rodgers at the helm. I see a very similar type of skill set and role mesh there for Malachi Corley, plus that nice draft capital being the first receiver taken in round 3 there. That's more so where I'm coming from there. Do you think there's any validity to that, or are you just like, no thanks?
It's just hard for me to come up with like a path for there to be 3 like legitimate fantasy threats in this offense. Like I've always just I've been operating under the thought that this is going to be a pretty, I don't want to say slow, but like they're not going to be relied upon heavily. I think they're going to be playing a lot of low scoring games with that great Jets defense. And I don't think Aaron Rodgers is going to be asked to be like doing a ton. So, and you've obviously got your guy in Garrett Wilson. The second option, well, you can debate who's the 1 versus the 2 between Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson, but you've got your obvious 2 offensive playmakers. And I think that Malachi Corley is going to bring a lot to the Jets as a player. Like, I just think this is one of those situations where Malachi Corley might help the team a lot. I just don't think he helps your fantasy roster too heavily. Like, you require a special kind of offensive environment for three guys to be supported and make significant impacts. And I don't think anyone's really expecting Corley to make a significant impact. Maybe I'm like holding him to a little bit too high of what I'm expecting him to do, but I just like don't see 3 major fantasy impacts out of the Jets offense. And we already know we've got 2 in Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson.
I totally see that argument. I guess the only counter I'll offer, and then I'll quickly touch upon Baker and Polk for the Pats and why I'm so pumped for them to be here. When you look at any game without Zach Wilson since Robert Salah has been there, I mean, we're talking Mike White and Joe Flacco, garbage quarterbacks. They actually average the most pass attempts per game with those 2 guys under center. I know LaFleur's not there anymore, and so it's a different coordinator, so I don't love Nathaniel Hackett. I get it that maybe he's not going to craft an offense that can sustain 3 guys, but we have seen them willing to chuck the rock, and that was with pretty much the same defense. It wasn't like they were in shootouts. They just love to chuck it. Pass rate over expectation there. So there might be a situation when they finally get the quarterback they gave up so much to get and they kind of base their future on. Maybe they just want to prove the world wrong, let the thing go, and they sling it all over the yard. I could see it. I could definitely see it. So don't get too discounted on Malachi Corley. I think it's going to be a really interesting role there in a Randall Cobb style situation. But just with the Pats too, Jalen Polk again picked 37 round 2 and Baker picked 110 round 4. I thought this stat was really illuminating. You know, Drake May has that cannon arm. That's what everybody's highlighting about him. Well, Jalen Polk on his deep targets, a 99.9 PFF grade, one of the highest graded wide receivers of this class. 14 of 28, caught 50% of his targets there for 567 yards and 5 touchdowns. And now, well, how did Javon Baker do on deep targets? 99.9 PFF grade as well, caught 15 of 30, so another 50% catch rate, 574 yards and 4 touchdowns. And another stat on Baker I saw, I love this guy. I'm so pumped for him. 80% of his catches went for a first down or a touchdown, which is just an insane rate. So 2 big play guys, deep ball mavens, loading up with a cannon-armed quarterback in Drake May. So I thought these guys, there's really, and who are they competing with? As you mentioned, Pop Douglas, the number 1 receiver last year. Come on. I like Kendrick Bourne when he's healthy, but he's coming off an ACL tear. I don't see anything really, as long as these guys are as good as I think they could be. I think they're going to both be immediate day 1 starters, both in line for about 20% or so target share from an up-and-coming, again, maybe Josh Allen quarterback from what the comps may say. So I think this is actually a sneaky, really good landing spot, and especially when you factor in draft capital for Polk.
Yeah, I just want to take a second to appreciate that Javon Baker stat that you pulled out. 80% of his catches going for a first down or a touchdown. That's ridiculous. I mean, I remember 2 years ago watching Marvin Harrison against Penn State. He had 11 catches, and either 10 or all 11 went for first downs or touchdowns. And I was like, holy shit, like that's an impressive performance. He did that for his entire collegiate career almost.
I know.
So that's kind of ridiculous. But not getting too bogged down on these Patriots guys, we can move on to the guys we gave a little bit more of a neutral grade. Starting with Malik Nabers, I mean, it's just so tough. Like, everyone loves him as a prospect, but now he's got, in his own words, he's got Daniel Jones as his quarterback. I don't know if you saw that interview from Nabers, but yeah, he's got Daniel Jones throwing the ball to him. It's tough. Like it's not the perfect comparison, but I want to liken this to like Garrett Wilson going to the Zach Wilson Jets. Like he's got the talent to be fantasy relevant, but I'm not going to be prioritizing this guy in drafts. He's going to slip down to the middle rounds, if I had to guess, like 6th round or so, and for redraft leagues at least. And it's just, he's got the talent to make the most out of a crappy situation, but there's only so much you can do as a wide receiver. I mean, you can get open every single time, but if the ball's not getting delivered to you on time and accurately, like there's only so much you can do. So we saw Garrett Wilson be good as a rookie in a terrible situation. And I think we can have similar expectations for Nabers. Like he's got the talent, the run after the catch skills to make explosive plays happen just so completely on his own with that yak stuff. But I don't think we can have, I don't think we can shoe him in as a top 24 receiver, and I don't think he'll be drafted like that.
Yeah, it's a tricky one for me because I agree completely that the quarterback talent is going to be a huge detriment here. Daniel Jones, absolutely garbage. Yet there is so much volume also up for grab because who's he competing with? Nobody here. Jalen Hyatt had his flashes last year. Sure, Darius Slayton can take the lid off the defense at times, but he should be Malik Nabers walking right into 130 to 150 targets. This is the exact example. I want to continue to reiterate too. Yeah, we gave it a C grade. He's still by far my second highest rated, both redraft and dynasty rookie wide receiver. Of course, Marvin ahead of him, but I do have Nabers sliding in at wide receiver 21 right now, which is a couple spots above the ECR. I know that it's a concern here, but I do think there's a little bit of floor baked in because if Daniel Jones does blow as much as he did last year, 2 years ago, he wasn't too shabby, but if he just never returns to that form and is garbage, well, he did sign Drew Lock, and I'm not saying Drew Lock is this insane world beater backup quarterback, but he can sling that rock. He got a few moments in games last year, and he really looked efficient. He impressed me, and for all honesty, I wouldn't even be stunned if he ends up beating out Daniel Jones. I know the money is in his pocket for Daniel Jones, but I don't know. Drew Lock at least bakes in a little bit more floor because we saw when Tyrod Taylor even became the starter last year. I mean, Darius Slayton started to average 16 points per game down the stretch last season. That's Darius Slayton. So I believe in Brian Daboll. It's also why I don't think this is a complete failure of a landing spot. I think he can craft coming over again from those Buffalo offenses. He does love to throw it. He can use his receivers in unique ways. I think they're going to move Malik Nabers all over the place, design a ton of looks to get him the rock, and I think he could just be quarterback proof given how talented he is. I don't know. Maybe nobody's Daniel Jones proof. We'll find out soon enough. But even if Jones is that bad that Malik Nabers can't get it done, then I imagine they're going to be calling Drew Lock's number, and I think even Drew Lock's good enough to then get him the rock. We shall see. Some other neutral guys we listed, some talents I like A.D. Mitchell. I was stunned to see him fall all the way to 52 in round 2. Going to the Colts, we kind of labeled that a neutral situation. We'll talk about in a second. Xavier Legette also going round 1. I like the capital, but to the Panthers at pick 32, it's tough to believe in anything tied to Bryce Young at the moment, even though he didn't get a fair shake last year. Still, it's not a situation I'm excited about at the minimal right now. Troy Franklin, stunned to see him fall to round 4, pick 102 to the Broncos. I'd love to call him a winner, and I've got some reasons why I could, but that draft capital is also pretty damning. Brian Thomas falling to the Jags at pick 23, an interesting spot, but ultimately there's a lot of mouths to feed. They signed Gabe Davis. Calvin Ridley himself was quite inconsistent in that kind of deep outside threat role. I don't know that we can expect more from Brian Thomas. And then Jermaine Burton, who, again, this is a redraft focus show. I love Jermaine Burton. In Dynasty, given that T. Higgins is likely gone next year, to be the number 2 for Joe Burrow is going to be awesome. But to be behind T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, yes, we've seen Tyler Boyd have some wide receiver 3 moments, but it's going to be tricky to expect Jermaine Burton to do anything substantial in redraft, or at least consistently at that. But I do love the player, and I could see him being a monster as soon as 2025. So those are a few guys we had neutral grades on. Is there anybody you want to dive into deeper? And I got a couple points I'd like to make after we go to your guys first.
Yeah, from a best ball perspective, I can see myself ending up with a lot of Brian Thomas. Just like he's one of those raw athlete, like super high ceiling guys, but we're not entirely sure what we're getting just because of he played behind Malik Nabers last year. He didn't operate as an alpha receiver in LSU's offense. So, but like everyone loves the talent and just like the attributes, the combination of size and speed. And given the prices of the other Jacksonville options, especially like Trevor Lawrence, I think his ADP is in the 120s right now. So I'm looking forward to grabbing a fair amount. Like I can just see myself backdooring a lot of these stacks. Like that offense was pegged to be like the breakout offense of 2023. And we didn't really get there. Like they had their moments, but we're seeing pretty significant reduction in prices for all these guys like Christian Kirk, Trevor Lawrence, and then we'll see where Brian Thomas settles out. But I like him as a talent. We talked about him a little bit in our pre-draft show. I've always been interested in him, and I think this is a solid landing spot. Obviously, there's some competition with the respects to Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, who's coming off a 100-catch season, and Zay Jones isn't nothing in my opinion. So there's some competition, but with the prices, I can just see a lot of backdoor stacks with this Jacksonville offense. And then I'll give my 2 cents on Jermaine Burton as our resident Bengals guy. But I mean, not a lot of people are expecting a big role for him in 2024, and I don't think it's going to be significant. But I mean, the Bengals ran 3 receiver sets at a top 5 rate in the league last year, and who are they trotting out there? I mean, like I for one, just like I like Andre Yoshi. You kind of got to be pretty wrapped up into the NFL or fantasy football to know that name, but he's kind of a flyer name out there. But who's gonna be the third guy? And I know it's tough. Like you've got Chase, Higgins, and Burton. Burton and Higgins, like they're not gonna be like a slot type of guy. Like Chase got some run out of the slot, but Higgins and Burton both profile to be like that vertical threat. And Burton's averaged his average yards per reception. I know it's like not a great stat or anything, but it's just like it kind of tells you what kind of player it is. It was 20 yards per reception last year. Like he's getting downfield. So we'll see what happens with them throughout the offseason, but it's hard to see him not out there just given who's on the roster right now and the frequency at which they run 3 receiver sets. So I think he'll get some chances, but I agree. Like this is a more setting yourself up for 2025 when T. Higgins has departed. But do you have any specific thoughts on any of these other guys?
Yeah, just to return to Brian Thomas, I think it's a really interesting point that in best ball, I'm certainly willing to keep going in. Now, we were taking him quite a bit at that like round 6 or so spot there, right around Calvin Ridley, in fact. And at this point, I would certainly bump him down quite a bit. He fell about 20 spots or so in my rankings. But in best ball, I do see the case there because 35% of Ridley's game last year went for 20 or more points. And that's exactly what you want in best ball, those big, huge spikes. 31-point day on the record, 25, 22.6. We had those huge spikes. There's more so when Ridley didn't hit. 5.2, 1.5, 4, 6.3. He was killing you in redraft when he wasn't hitting, but ultimately he had those huge spikes to help you out in best ball where we don't worry when he's not hitting. So I could see this being one of those definite situations of better in best ball for Brian Thomas and giving you maybe 5 to 6 of those huge spike weeks. That's really what you want in that kind of 70 to 80 range where I imagine he's going to start falling to. So I think that's a good point there. I just might avoid him in redraft myself. I did want to just mention Troy Franklin, given that I thought he was going to go round 2. I really like the player, and I love that he's now ended up with his college quarterback. I'm a little bit worried about that round 4 draft capital, given how predictive draft capital can be to future success. But the Broncos did come out and say, Sean Payton, that they had a round 2 grade on him, that they had no idea why he fell that far, that they made sure to trade up and go get him. By the time he was still there in round 4, they had to go up and get him and link up their college quarterback with his main weapon from there. And we've seen how well Sean Payton can use the deep threats, but also Troy Franklin is not just the deep threat. He could get it done once he has the ball in his hands. He kind of becomes that running back, even though he's smaller. He's not a big, painful bruising guy, but he's very shifty, very crafty with the ball in his hands. So I think he could be used very intriguingly by Sean Payton linked up with his college quarterback. It's tough not to talk about A.D. Mitchell just real quick, too, given that a lot of people expected him, myself included, to be a first-round pick. Now, we highlighted this, a lot of the analytics guys thought, the worst yards per route run ever for a projected first-round pick. And just if he's so talented in the film, when he pops, he pops. Why is he not doing it more often? I thought all of that was very fair, and we saw him fall as a result here. So without the draft capital, it does have to make you get a bit concerned. Also, the fact that this is probably going to be a bottom 10 team in total pass attempts, assuming that Anthony Richardson stays healthy, they're definitely going to lean on him and his legs, as well as Jonathan Taylor. So I just don't know that I see a pie here big enough for A.D. Mitchell to also be sustained when you got target hog Michael Pittman. I probably do see Josh Downs out of the slot, some more higher percentage looks, probably getting a little bit more volume than him too. So we're looking at the third guy on the target totem pole, as intriguing as his skill set is. And I love that Shane Steichen, he's got a rare ability to separate at the top of his routes. He's got an arsenal of releases versus press, man. You see it on Show Up on Tape to get him where we got him. I couldn't be more fired up. You love that comment. It's awesome. And he certainly will probably have a spike or two, probably 4 or 5 of them in there. So maybe in best ball, yeah, he could still be a guy that you go after. But to me, the volume just won't be there for any type of steady consistency. And that lower draft capital really is a ding, because that was what a lot of people were propping him up on. So a little bit nervous to see him go there. And I do not consider it a win because of it.
Yeah, that's completely understandable. I mean, I think your point about just like the draft capital versus the production sums it up pretty well. Like, people assumed he was going to be a first-round pick, and that would justify his lack of efficiency in college. And now that he slid into the mid, it's not even like early second round. It was firmly like the mid-second round. So it's definitely concerning. But I think like if there's some light at the end of the tunnel, we're going to have a high, fast-paced offense in Indianapolis, and we know what kind of arm strength we're dealing with Anthony Richardson. So I think, like you said, we can expect to get a couple of spike weeks out of A.D. Mitchell just with Anthony Richardson under center. And I just think there's going to be a quality offense in general. So with a receiver with a talent like A.D. Mitchell and just a high-quality offense generally, I mean, it's kind of a given that he's going to have some performance throughout the season. And so I'm not too adverse to drafting A.D. Mitchell, but I am not as interested as I was pre-draft in our big board drafts. So we'll see where his price shakes out, and he is going to be one of those guys who's taking probably a significant slide down draft boards. But we'll see where he settles out, and we can reevaluate there. But yeah, I was disappointed with the landing spot for A.D. Mitchell, but I've not completely given up hope yet.
What is up, you fantasy wolf? Thanks so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, share your thoughts in the comments, check out some more videos, and join the newest Wolfpack by subscribing below.